More now on our major news of the party's plans to introduce a gas reservation. Tony Wood is the Energy and Climate Change Program Director at the Grattan Institute and joins us now from Melbourne. Good morning, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Dan.
Tell me, what's your reaction to what we've seen so far of this discussion of a potential change to those gas policies?
Well, I think the reality is that we do need to find a way to make sure that Australians get both. That is, we get the benefit of exporting gas to countries that need it and produce external revenue for us, but also to make sure that our existing gas consumers pay a fair price and get access to enough gas to continue to do what they do. And that's what has been a challenge for quite a long time now. A version of a reservation policy may be appropriate. It's not yet clear what gas would be reserved in what proportion, by whom, for whom. A lot of detail to be worked through, and this will be diabolically complicated potentially, but it's very clear to keep our eye on the ball. What are we trying to achieve here? And make sure that wherever we do actually delivers that outcome and doesn't deliver difficult, perverse economic outcomes that would be not good for anybody.
Well, my next question was going to be, how do you think this would work? But I think you've answered that with that there are many, many more questions. So in terms of those questions that remain, we don't actually have a lot of detail at this point, do we?
No, and I think you could, for example, try and set aside a huge amount of gas for the domestic market and flood the domestic market with more gas than it needs, and that might bring down price. Or you can set the price, or some combination of those. And the complexity around the East Coast is that there's a lot more potential sources of gas. They've got a lot more potential ways of getting gas to other markets than the Western Australian system currently works. So it's that complexity which is important to make sure this is done in a way that does deliver the right outcome for both consumers and producers. And that won't be easy, but it's really important that it gets done, because where we are now has not been very good. Remember, there's a separate issue which also has to be addressed, and that is that Victoria is running out of gas regardless of where it comes from and how much is reserved.
You just mentioned, depending on what the details are, which we don't know yet, that there could be perverse outcomes. What would you be looking for particularly? What are you concerned about?
Well, for example, and I don't think the people who buy gas want this either, we don't want to permanently subsidise Australian users of gas because they're not competitive. I mean, our consumers of gas here should be at least paying no more than the people who are buying our gas in Japan or Korea or China, wherever it might be. Now, working out how you do that is a lot easier to say than it is to do. Because that's really the outcome we're looking for. And it's going to be an interesting question whether the government, whether the ACCC does this, because we haven't had a problem with running out of gas. The problem has been, what should that gas price be? And a number of things out of the control of government, like the Ukraine war, have contributed to high prices, and they haven't gone away. And our domestic users are being impacted by that, and that's not going to change anytime soon.
And if this gas was to be quarantined, where would it come from? Because isn't the case that the deals that are done between these multinational companies and overseas consumers are done well in advance, sometimes up to a decade in advance?
And that's the complexity here as well, Dan, because what's in place now are very long-term contracts, some of which will actually start to expire in the early 2030s. And that's not a bad time to think about how we do this. One of the interesting things behind what you just said is that those big overseas users have been prepared to sign up to those 10 and 15, 20-year contracts. We haven't had, in recent years, any gas consumers in Australia prepared to do that. There have been historically some big ones, but not many. And so if you're not prepared to sign up for those sort of contracts, it's sort of hard to see why you should get a special deal. Now, that's where the sensitivity emerges as to what's an appropriate balance here between the suppliers and the consumers, particularly when you think about the big commitments that have to be made if you want to be able to get access to gas for the long term. Remembering also that gas is a fossil fuel. And at some point, a lot of those domestic consumers will be moving away from gas, which may be one reason why they're not all that happy about signing a long-term contract, but they're really unhappy about the price of the short-term contracts.
There's so many layers to this, Tony. If you were designing a system now with the circumstances we have right now with what's in place, what do you think is the best immediate options to impact that cost of living pressure from energy?
Well, one thing I would have done rather than impose the $12 price cap would be say, okay, are we seeing our producers making windfall profits and imposing a windfall profit tax or a tax on those windfall profits, which would go away when the need for them dissipates, when the Ukraine war finally goes away, as it eventually will. But I think the other side of it's going to be, how do we really think about the role of gas? I mean, we almost have to start from that position, because the gas has been our friend for many, many years. Now we're not too sure how much we want for how long and what for. And as we think about moving to a low emissions future, we need to think about exactly what's the role for gas. And inside of that, the issue of the export market emerges. But I don't think we can consider the export market by itself. The right thing to do now is to think really hard about what is the role of gas in our economy, in this country, and think about all the things we use gas for and get that right. Then we can think about what we do about the export market.
Yeah, and I wonder if that is a conversation that we can have, Tony, given we have the federal budget being handed down today. We are about to head into a federal election campaign. Both major political parties have either announced or seem to be on the cusp of announcing policies in this area, they say, because of cost of living pressures and about that supply security. But if this becomes just something that no one wants to have that big and difficult conversation, what are the long-term implications of that?
Well, one would be that we just progressively see users of gas closing down in Australia. I mean, I'm not talking about households. Obviously, that would be a different question. We're not facing that sort of problem. But if the prices stay where they are, that will move a lot of people from gas to electricity. By itself, that's not a bad thing. But if at the same time it means that some people's business closes, and we wish they hadn't, because ultimately we find a better way, we could have had a better way for them to solve that, that would be the biggest risk, I think. I think the rest of it can be sorted out. The issue of the impact of gas price on electricity price is a big deal, but gas is an expensive way to produce anything. And the issue here is that we're never going to get cheap gas again. I mean, the gas-led recovery that the coalition government tried when they were last in power just didn't work. It didn't do anything, because it was almost like a pipe dream. We'd never get back to those low gas prices. So if we're stuck with gas prices and fossil fuel for a while yet, then I think we've got to deal with how that's going to work. And for most people, gas will remain affordable, but it's going to be more expensive than it used to be, and that will have consequences. And I don't think you can artificially suppress the price of gas unless the government wants to pay for it. And I don't think the government wants to do that, either side.